the Republicans in Congress who have rolled over and accepted almost everything else Trump have done is they've set a marker down, which is they do not want him bailing out on Ukraine. They want the onus to be on Putin to make concessions. And I think that sort of, again, limits how far the Kremlin can go in terms of trying to spin Trump. Because guess who those Ukrainians who are going to be in Washington next week, guess who else they're going to meet with? They're going to be meeting with legislators up on the Hill.
Interesting, though, the interpretations of Trump's reactions here, they vary widely between saying when he says, quote unquote, that he was finally pissed off with the whole situation. Having said that, if you look at what he does and doesn't do, almost within the same breath, he then expresses the frustration that and threatens Zelensky over this minerals deal should he not sign a new one. So on the one hand, he's expressing anger and has he actually done anything yet in terms of leverage on Moscow? It doesn't look like it, does it? And on the other hand, he's threatening Zelensky. So at the end of the day, you could say it's more of the same.
Yeah, except in terms of the media cycle. And I absolutely take what you said about Zelensky. And we'll talk about that rare earth minerals dynamic in a minute. But the news cycle, most people focused on him getting upset with Putin because it hasn't happened before, and not on him getting mad at Zelensky because he has done that repeatedly. So in terms of news cycle, it framed up in terms of that Trump was mad at Putin. And what it did is there's a space where Ukraine and the adults in the room, the responsible Trump administration officials, and especially Europeans who have played a big part in this, they still have the diplomatic initiative. Now, diplomatic initiative doesn't mean we're going to get a ceasefire. Kremlin is going to it, but it still looks like that Ukraine has the high ground, that they are the ones who are negotiating in good faith, and Russia is not. And while that impression is there, even though the Trump administration is not authorizing new military aid to Ukraine, it is not holding up the military aid that was already authorized. And of course, it's renewed the intelligence sharing. So Ukraine is in a better position now than it has been in the past couple of months. And even though Trump swings back and forth, right now, there's sort of a constancy, which is that there is a Europe, US, Ukraine channel, which is keeping Kyiv in terms of we're the guys that are actually being responsible here. The Kremlin's the ones who are basically being irresponsible by standing in the way of getting some resolution.
In that light, what strategy can the Europeans and Ukraine actually pursue diplomatically with the US to keep Donald Trump on side?
You keep Trump from running after some shiny bauble, which means he goes back into Vladimir Putin's pocket. So let me flip that question by telling you where we are as you and I speak and what Ukraine and Europe have to guard against. There's a man named Kirill Dmitriev, who I think very few people would have heard of him, but he's a financier. He's head of the Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund. So he's an investment guy. He's also a guy who has worked with the Trump camp for almost a decade. You can go back to 2017, where he had back channel talks, even before Trump took office, with a man named Eric Prince, who was most famous for being the founder of the Blackwater Mercenaries. Anyway, why do I mention Kirill Dmitriev? He's in Washington as we speak, 2 days of talks. He's meeting initially a man named Steve Witkoff, who was supposed to be Trump's envoy on the Middle East, but has somehow transformed into Trump's envoy on Russia. And that's not good. I'm going to be very diplomatic about what I say here, because
someone has to be.
Yeah, exactly. If it wasn't, times is held in such a regard. But Steve Witkoff, not the sharpest tool in the box when it comes to Ukraine and Russia. A few days ago, he gave an interview with the hard right ideologue Tucker Carlson, where he talked all about Vladimir Putin loves Donald Trump so much. He's such a good friend. When Trump suffered an assassination attempt, Putin prayed for him, and then he repeated the Kremlin's lines, right? So Dmitriev's gone to Witkoff. Now, what has Dmitriev gone to Witkoff with? We don't know this. It has not been officially admitted. But a few days ago, Kirill Dmitriev said, wouldn't it be great if Russia and the U.S. could have a deal on rare earth minerals, right? So you take the fact that Ukraine is not going to accept the U.S. ultimatum, which is what it is on rare earth minerals. Russia can fill the gap. So Dmitriev's going to try that ploy with Witkoff, and then with Trump.
And this is access to rare earth minerals in Russia.
And Russian-occupied territory in Ukraine. See, this is the stinger. If Trump accepts it, what you then say is, look at this territory we occupy. You need to recognize our occupation, and then you get even more minerals from this area, right? So what does Europe and the Ukraine do in the face of this? They expose what is being done. They say, look, the priority here is the ceasefire. The priority here is the halt to the killing. We can certainly talk about minerals when we have the ceasefire, but let's keep the focus on who is standing in the way of that. And meanwhile, what Europe does is continue the military and economic support for Ukraine. You don't flag on that front either.
It's interesting. I heard someone talk about Donald Trump's foreign policy as being, the commodification of diplomacy was the phrase they used. And if you had that kind of temptation with that visit to Washington that you just described, how tempted will he be with that compared to the argument that you're saying that the Europeans are using along with Ukraine? Let's get the ceasefire first. Let's not talk about the business deals. But at the same time, he's given the ultimatum to Zelensky on his proposed minerals deal. Where does he draw the line? Which way do we think he will go?
It depends on which advisors are influential in this. You have to go a little bit beyond Donald Trump. So let me add another element to the story. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, who is the one who has presented the ultimatum to Ukraine, which in effect is, we get total control over your minerals, right? And you have to repay us every bit of aid that we've given you plus interest. Ukraine is sending a delegation to meet Bessent this week in Washington. So they're going to counter the Russian move, right? But that Ukraine delegation will also talk to other officials, I suspect, such as Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor. I suspect they'll probably talk to the envoy, Keith Kellogg. And they'll try to get those guys, lined up where they then go talk to Trump. And how do they spin it? If they spin it with it, which is, we can get a great deal with Russia, that's our priority, that's a problem. If they can spin it as, you want this ceasefire, then you still have the initiative. So we're in a wait and see mode for a few days over that. But meanwhile, this is the other thing why, and like I said, this is never a positive situation for Ukraine. They're still under threat of being conquered by Russia. But you're buying yourself time, because the interesting thing here is that the Russian advance in eastern Ukraine has slowed. They have taken some territory in the Donetsk region, but they've taken very few towns. And even that gradual advance is starting to get more limited. The Russians are running into problems. They're running into battlefield problems, and they're running into economic problems in terms of how much they can keep their overheated economy going. So even if you don't get a ceasefire, as long as Europe stays behind Ukraine and you keep Trump in play where he doesn't simply side with the Kremlin, you're doing okay.
There's been this unusual sign of cross-party consensus, 25 Republicans and an equal number of Democrats sponsoring a bill that could impose 500% secondary tariffs on buyers of Russian oil if Putin doesn't do a ceasefire deal with Ukraine. It also included gas, uranium and other products. Trump is appearing to back it at the moment. Could he effectively force President Putin to stop the war by cutting off the revenue that finances it?
Well, this is a long road that you have to do. First of all, my reading of that, that's important, 50 senators, 25 each party, a Republican, Lindsey Graham, who is a friend of Trump, co-sponsoring alongside the Democrat Richard Blumenthal. That's in the sense of being a resolution rather than a bill. Now, a resolution is largely symbolic. We would like the administration to do this. You still have to get from a stretch, which is the administration would then implement those sanctions to put them in there. And that's a big ask, because how far would Trump go when he still wants to win favor with Putin? He still wants the idea of the photo op with Putin. But I think the significance here is that the Republicans in Congress who have rolled over and accepted almost everything else Trump have done is they've set a marker down, which is they do not want him bailing out on Ukraine. They want the onus to be on Putin to make concessions. And I think that sort of, again, limits how far the Kremlin can go in terms of trying to spin Trump. Because guess who those Ukrainians who are going to be in Washington next week, guess who else they're going to meet with? they're going to be meeting with legislators up on the Hill.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. If you'd like to be the first to get exclusive content, you can sign up for membership with the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest news or read it on thetimes.com. My thanks to our producer today, Louis Sykes, and to you for watching. Bye for now.